Hello and welcome. The Israelis call it a separation wall, necessary, they claim, to keep them safe from Palestinian attacks. It's an apartheid wall, according to the Palestinians stuck on the other side of the barrier, who also believe it's Israel's attempt to grab more of their land. Well, shortly after the Al-Aqsa Intifada began at the beginning of the decade, Israel began to build the imposing structure. The Palestinians, complaining that the wall's route did not follow the 1948 borders and therefore confiscated more of their land, took Israel to the International Court of Justice at The Hague. Exactly 4 years ago, that World Court issued a non-binding ruling that the wall was illegal, but nothing has stopped it. The Israeli government, citing its success in stopping suicide bombings, has vowed to finish the 700-kilometer-plus project within a few years. Meanwhile, tens of thousands of Palestinians remain stranded between the barrier and the Israeli border, and many villages have been split in two or nearly encircled. On this show, we ask, what is the wall really all about? And if the International Court of Justice has judged it illegal, how can Israel be allowed to continue building it? Don't forget, we take your calls on the show, and you can reach us at the numbers at the bottom of your screen. Joining me for a discussion on the wall and its impact, we have Dov Weissglas, who was the senior advisor to former Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, under whose premiership Israel began the construction of the wall. Mr. Weissglas joins us from Tel Aviv. And in New York, Dr. Norman Finkelstein, a political scientist whose focus is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Until recently, he was a professor at DePaul University. Now, he's the author of many books, including Beyond Chutzpah, on the misuse of anti-Semitism and the abuse of history. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. And Dov Weissglas, if I could welcome you in from Tel Aviv and ask what you think the wall is doing to the relationship between Israelis and Palestinians. Certainly, how is it affecting the prospects for long-term peace?
Okay, first of all, I would like, let's use the accurate term, yes? We're not talking about a wall, we're talking about a fence. Out of what has been built so far, I think less than 7% is a solid wall. All the rest, it's a thin metal net wall, and the reason is very simple. That protective fence needs shoulders or margins of about 150 meters on both sides to protect people from one side of the fence from shooting or from being hurt by rifles or some other automatic weapon that might be used on the other side. Now, of course, in rural areas, you have enough ground to build those buffer strips on both sides. When it comes into a build-up area, there is not space enough to have those buffer space or buffer strip. That's why a solid wall is needed. But altogether, as I said, the wall itself is less than 7% from the total length of the fence. The main goal of the fence is to stop this mad Palestinian attack of suicidal murderers that brought a death of over 1,000 Israelis since 2000. 1,000 Israelis. Just let me emphasize, if the United States population is about 42 times more than Israel, it means that it is like killing of 42,000 Americans. I think almost 20 times more than the September 11 catastrophe. No country in the world will allow it to happen.
Well, Mr.
The fence was needed.
Mm-hmm.
The fence was needed to keep these suiciders at the right side.
What question then? Why is that fence, as you're describing it, and we'll get onto the terminology and of course your perspective on the relative harm that's being done by the Palestinians, but why is that fence or that barrier or wall not following the green line demarcation of 1948? Why is it occupying so much of the West Bank?
I tell you, because I will explain. The fence never intended to be a political border. The fence never intended to be a border at all. It is a security measure. It's a fence. It can always be removed, and when the time for a final status resolution will come, the fence can be moved here or there, back and forth. It doesn't create any kind of effects. The fence route was primarily created by the demography. The fence meant to include, to protect Jewish centers of population and to keep off Palestinian centers of population. And since, as everybody knows now, demography or realities on the ground are not following exactly the 67 line, That's why the fence is not following the 1611 lines, but it is following the realities lines, or the lines of the current demography. As I said, once we will reach a stage of a final state of resolution with the Palestinians, the fence can take it either backwards or forwards.
Okay, so let me bring in Norman Finkelstein here. And Dr. Finkelstein, of course, I'm sure you've got some views to add to this based on what Mr. Weissglas has said. But let me start by asking you on what you feel is in the terminology of this barrier, wall, fence. First of all, how do you see it? And how do you regard the way it's been routed through the West Bank?
Well, I don't think it's a matter of personal opinion. It happens that the International Court of Justice, in its advisory opinion, begins the opinion by discussing what's the appropriate term for the structure. It says there have been 3 terms proposed: 1, barrier; 2, fence; 3, wall. The International Court of Justice went on to say, after determining that each of these terms has its shortcomings and virtues, they decided, having looked at all 3 terms, the best term to use is the term wall. And henceforth, in all international human rights organization reports, the reference is to the wall. At this point, I would say that probably the term wall is inadequate. At this point, it should be called an annexationist wall, since it's clear that Israel is annexing between 10 and 13% of the West Bank and using the wall and terrorism as a pretext for the annexation.
So also, Dr. Finkelstein, what about the this couple of the articles you've written? You've been fairly cutting, of course, in your commentary on the wall, if we call it that, and said that Palestinians should break down this wall. How would you advise them to do that?
Well, before we get to what the Palestinians should, in my opinion, do, I think we should be clear on what the International Court of Justice stated in its opinion. Number 1, the International Court of Justice stated that Israel has no right to any territory beyond its June 1967 borders. That means the question of Israel's title to the West Bank and Gaza is now closed under international law. Number 2, the International Court of Justice stated that East Jerusalem is occupied Palestinian territory. That means the question of who owns or who has title to East Jerusalem is closed under international law. And number 3, the International Court of Justice stated that the settlements Israel is building under international law are illegal. Now, that was not just the opinion of the 14 judges who voted for the advisory opinion. That was also the opinion of Thomas Bergenthal, who cast a 1 negative vote. He said that the settlements are clearly illegal under international law, and if the wall is being built to protect the settlements, that wall is illegal. So it's hardly a trivial question or one of quote-unquote demographic realities whether or not the wall is being built around the settlements. Okay. In fact, the wall is designed to incorporate approximately 60% of the settlements and 80% of the settlers. That is all completely illegal under international law. In fact, under international law, it constitutes what's called a grave breach of international law and therefore a war crime.
Okay. Let me get to Mr. Weissglas in Tel Aviv and ask about the, put an email that we got from California. Mr. Weissglas, a viewer by the name of Lesia wrote in and touching on this issue of justification of security needs of Israel, says that never can be enough security, but says even though the World Court's ruling is not binding, it is at least a way to tell Israel that the world does not accept its argument as based on defense. I do think younger Israelis do not want to continue this land grab or supporting the settlers. It takes a lot of resources to accommodate these settlements, and after all, the land is stolen. So although Israel quotes the number of suicide bombers as having gone down since the barrier went up, surely it's having a greater negative effect in the amount of hate and mistrust it generates amongst the Palestinians. It has a diminishing return, surely.
Let me say, as I said, the defense is a security measure. Defense now comes to provide security to the people who actually live on that locations, no matter if Mr. Finkelstein or some other people believe that these locations are legal or illegal. There is no such thing like illegal life, okay? Let's put it that way. People who live no matter where in settlements that maybe later in the future will become a part of the state of Israel. Maybe they will not become, but so far they are alive. Their lives are very much legal, and they need a protection from Palestinian madness like human missiles. Okay, now since the fence was built and almost completed, there is a drop of almost 100% in the number of suicidal attacks. And with all due respect, of course, in international law, I would invite the judges of international law once to come on board of a bus after a suicidal attack and to see how over 50% of the passengers are bodies who were simply separated from heads. It is the primary obligation of every government all along the world is to protect its citizens' life. And if in this equation or in this balance of certain inconvenience, might be even a material inconvenience caused to the Palestinians on one hand, and life of people and protection of people against being blown up by madmen, I think the answer is very clear. You know, I think when I was in the government, Ariel Sharon, then as the Prime Minister, he was very much against the fence. He opposed the idea of the fence, and it was as late as I think it was late of 2002, maybe early 2003, for the first time, that the realities caused by the suicidal attack campaign we gone under made him to change his mind. We used to say that this security fence was compelled on us by the Palestinians. I remember some Israelis even offered to call it Yasser Arafat's fence. We didn't want the fence, but once we found that people cannot, come safely out of a pizza place, that fence was necessitated, and those are the fences.
We'll be right back with more on this debate.